Brown says, get that India. Big boy.
Call an ambulance! Maybe call a priest! Oh, what a shot! What a shot! Campbell killer!
Hello and welcome back to another edition of the Tip Sheet Podcast. As always, I'm your host, John, also known as Forty20. Joining me for, it feels like it's been ages, but it's a tick over a week since our last recording. It's my good mates, Sixties and Clint. Fellas, we're doing the amalgamated all-in-one podcast week to week now as we wait for the preseason to begin in earnest. But in the meantime, there's an NRL Grand Final and an NRLW Grand Final to be talking about. So a bit of important non-Parramatta footy to discuss this week. But before we do that, as always, a quick check-in on both of you. Starting for you, Sixties. How's your week been, mate?
Look, not too bad, mate. First of all, can you believe that it's only 2 years ago that we were going through all this grand final week excitement with the Eels lining up against the Panthers back in 2022? It seems such a short time ago, and yet at the same time it almost feels like a distant memory. But, good luck to the Panthers and Storm supporters and hope they're enjoying this week. Mate, yeah, been a bit busy. Over the weekend, I went up to the new Dural Club that Paraleagues took over, the old Dural Country Club, and they've spent a lot of money in refurbishing the country club, so it's now called the Dural Club, and it's well worth a visit up there. I would barely recognise the interiors as they are now, so anyone that's a Paraleagues member, all your membership privileges available there. It's part of the Paraleagues group, so get up there. It was a good event on Sunday, so very, very glad I popped up there and had a look around and got to talk to a few people, took a few photos, so was busy with that. But fellas, overnight, there was a shooting around the corner from where I live. It was not the sort of thing that you expect in Winston Hills, but it happened. The police had the street all cordoned off and there were media everywhere. So that was a bit of a shock to the system. So it's been a crazy mixed up week. And with that in mind, I'll also give a bit of a mention too that if you're here for this football podcast, it mightn't sound like a football podcast at this stage. Please give us a like. Please give us a like and subscribe no matter what platform that you're listening to. It helps to get the podcast content out there to more Parramatta Reels supporters. So we really do appreciate that. And also a shout out to our sponsors, star partners, Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Clint, I can preempt what you're about to say by telling our listeners you're not in the best health at the moment, mate.
Well, I don't want to freak you on and out. I just got a flu. That's all. But yes, if I'm sounding a little bit more husky than normal, then you've preempted why. 60s, but no, I'm all good. We'll see how long I last tonight, though.
Well, let's give an early call then. Can we get it done in an hour? What's the tip? Yes or no, fellas?
Oh, I'm hoping.
I'm usually the optimist, but being a lifelong Parramatta fan and haven't got much room for much else. But I'm a little bit more pessimistic when it comes to the podcast, so I'm not that hopeful.
What's the little green travel agent? Computer says no.
I'm going to go for 57 minutes here, fellas. So
I hope you've got a stopwatch.
Let's hold them to it. 40.
That's it. Exactly.
Okay. Well, I'll crack the whip then. Hit the news stinger.
News team, assemble!
Well, fellas, how about being able to start a Parramatta Reels podcast by talking about signings? John, Jack Williams and Dean Hawkins now confirmed to be joining the Eels top squad, and that follows on from signing news last week of Parramatta Pathways players being extended. Good news, mate.
Yeah, Jason Ryles and obviously the recruitment and retention staff getting some good work done. Hawkins and Williams have been their names have been swirling among the rumour sort of trails for a while regarding the Parramatta Eels, and it's nice to get some confirmation there. I think it's 2 years for Dean and 3 for Williams. So, especially in the case of Williams, it seems to be a pretty serious addition to the forward stocks for the team, whereas Hawkins is going to be the backup and maybe utility man depending on how things play out for the Eels. But good acquisitions. Hawkins has plenty of experience as a substitute or backup player at the Rabbitohs and has spearheaded them to a reserve grade premiership. And Williams is he's been a bit of a bit part player at the Sharks, but he's better than that. And he's been quite good in smaller opportunities at the Shire. And I suppose the only real knock on him is he has a bit of a drop in his game, and that's going to be on the Parramatta coaching staff to try and coach out of him. But he's got a bit of potential there. So some nice acquisitions, and hopefully the ball's still rolling for the Parramatta Eels because they've got spots to fill out in that top 30. But given what's available on the market and given where the Parramatta Eels were with their cap situation, you can't be turning your head too much at these two pickups. They're good, solid acquisitions for a new coach trying to spearhead the club in a new direction.
Yeah, I'd like to think there'll be something like 2 or 3 more signings announced throughout the pre-season. I don't know when that will be, but they do need to fill out the roster. As you know, 40, these 2 names of Williams and Hawkins were passed on to us through sources probably, I think it must be about 6 weeks ago, something like that. And there are a couple of other names on the list that we know weren't secured and have stayed with their current clubs. But it's good to know that these ones have finally been added to the Eels roster. I guess the thing is too that Jack Williams has been a player that the Eels have gone after or have been interested in for a few years now. Clint, what's your take on getting the signatures of these 2 blokes?
Well, I mean, it's an important step to rounding out the top 30, which has been a struggle for us the past couple of seasons, as it's been well documented, both on this show and in many other places. But, I'm excited that we've got a genuine half as a backup. I mean, if Mitch is playing Origin again, and, you think he's every chance to, given his success in that arena this year, it's good to have someone that can come in and fill in for a couple of games in the likes of Dean Hawkins, a New South Wales Cup grand final winning halfback. That's about as good as you can hope for in a backup half. And Jack Williams is obviously a very reliable first grader with still a bit of untapped potential, I'd say. There's some likeable things, as Forty was touching on, particularly his leg speed and with the ball in hand. There's a lot to like there. But what I'm trying to understand is, boys, what everyone views him as, because he's predominantly played middle throughout his career. He was listed as a back rower on Cronulla's site, as well as in the press release of his signing today, that he's viewed as a back rower. Obviously, that can entail lock, but do we personally view him more as a middle or as an edge? Because I personally, at this point, view him as a middle. But who's to say that he might not? He might just be waiting for the opportunity on the edge, and we can turn him into an out-and-out edge player for us.
Clint, I think the way I view it is that we have a number of players at the club who can
do both.
Versatile. They can play both positions. He might just be another one of those players, and if he's got that versatility to play on the edge as well, he might just provide what Jason Ryles is looking for in terms of shoring up the defence on an edge. So I guess we'll find out when the pre-season starts for what sort of position he takes. The other interesting one that's floating around a bit, and John knows that this particular player was mentioned to us again about 6 to 8 weeks ago, and it's been reported around in the media at the moment, is the young Bulldogs back, Josh Papali'i, who is still under contract to the Bulldogs. He could be a player that plays fullback. He's got the versatility possibly to be a bench player. John, would he be the type of player that you'd like the Eels to recruit, or do you think this news that's come out about him being on the Eels list is simply a rehashing of some old news that was floating around about him?
It's hard to gauge because it comes on the back of an actual successful signing in Jack Williams. So it would sort of lend credence to the idea that maybe the Eels aren't done and they are like in pursuit of Papali'i. But you always have to, be realistic. He is under contract. The Bulldogs are on the rise as well, so it's going to be tough to prime out from there. I suppose the big argument would be that their backline is absolutely loaded, and even with the expected departure of Josh Adokar, they've still got a surplus of outside backs that already aren't seeing first grade. So he's already caught in that logjam. And the Eels, on the flip side, while we do have some good players, there's certainly opportunities here to break into that backline. So I'm hopeful that we can get something done there. But he would be a good pickup. He is sharp, got a bit of pace, can play multiple positions. He's a fullback by trade, but he's played through the backline in 5'8" as well for the Bulldogs at times. And I think there was talk that he could even play dummy half coming from the Bulldogs at one point. So he's got that flexibility that you'd like to have in a back end of a top 30 sort of guy and a development sort of guy. And I would be obviously very happy to acquire him. But again, he's contracted to the Bulldogs, so it's never easy to get that sort of thing done. But even if it doesn't get done, I do like the direction of that sort of recruitment. Finding talented young players that are sort of caught in a logjam at a current club and giving them a pathway at our club. And it's just smart. So I like to see more of that. I hope that he isn't the last that we sort of target in that regard.
Yeah, and of course the other aspect of that is that if you operate by that strategy, for me it becomes a path out of having players that are on maybe top end of the market deals who are on historical contracts, that it's not quite so easy to move on at the present time. But you might just find some gems in the younger players rather than trying to find gems in older players that maybe you think previous clubs haven't got the best out of. So I agree with you there. I quite like that strategy. Fellas, I want to jump into the NRLW now because there is a heap of news around the NRLW. I want to launch into the bright young star, Rory Owen. I'm calling her the Lioness for now. So much news around her at the moment. First of all, she's extended with the club, which obviously we're really, really pleased about. She's taken the Rookie of the Year double, winning that award with the RLPA and with the Eels. She was deemed ineligible for Rookie of the Year Dally M, and we'll get to that in just a few seconds. But she was also then selected in the Prime Minister's 13 team, as was Abbi Church and Sean Russell in the men's PM 13 team. But back to Rory Owen. First of all, our congratulations to her on all of those awards. Highly deserved. But Clint, the ineligibility for the Dally M Rookie of the Year, I know that you've got to have criteria, and I understand the way that the intent of that criteria with the Dally M's, but surely someone like Rory Owen, the intent wasn't to have players in her situation deemed ineligible. Surely.
Well, she shouldn't be. Yeah, she shouldn't be. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think you ask any of the players in the NRLW, she was the clear winner in that category. The clear best performer, for a first season player. So, and I don't mean any disrespect to the name that escapes me at the moment, the player who took it out at the Dally M last night, but Rory had an excellent season, and I think the RLPA award and the Eels Club award probably go somewhere to have some vindication of that recognition among her peers. It's just crummy that it affected her at that particular awards night last night, but sometimes these things happen, and it's there are means in which to change some of these things. So Rory had such a good season. I couldn't imagine that they wouldn't be investigating this after this, because to me she was the clear winner.
Yeah, absolutely. John, can you just explain that eligibility rule for our listeners?
Yeah, so in order to be eligible for the Dally M Rookie of the Year, at least inside the NRLW, because I've never heard of this stipulation for the NRL before, and indeed we've had some union converts come across. I don't know if they've won it, but they've been in contention. You have to have spent at least 2 years in a rugby league pathway. And now I imagine that's been instituted on the NRLW side to stop all the recruitment, not to stop the recruitment itself, but to stop the teams going out and signing rugby 7 stars, have them come in as, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28-year-old, seasoned pros and being eligible for Rookie of the Year. But by the same token, surely there's a compromise and a cutoff that could be instituted where if a player comes in before 21 years of age, and if, even then they would have had a minimum of exposure at higher levels of rugby union, they would still be eligible for the rugby league Rookie of the Year. In the case of Rory Owen, she was a club level player. So it seems not spiteful by intent, but perhaps by design, that she's been out of the running this year, and maybe it bodes further consideration for the NRL to maybe add those parameters to allow players like Rory Owen, and not because she's a Parramatta Eel. If Rory Owen was playing for the Cronulla Sharks and had the season she had, you'd want to see her crowned as the Rookie of the Year if she was that good for another team. So, yeah, it's a bit unfortunate for her. Obviously, she got her dues in the RLPA side of things, and that's an award that I imagine is probably viewed for a similar level of prestige now among the players, because the RLPA is trying to elevate its awards and be very serious about it, which is good. But it is a shame that she couldn't complete the hat trick, get the Eels gong, the RLPA gong, and then obviously the Dally M Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, but speaking of awards, we're going to dive into the rest of the awards, because we've had the Eels end of year awards that would normally be staged as part of the Ken Thornett medal, and with the later finish of the NRLW season, it's now held separately to the Ken Thornett awards for the men. But we've also had the Dally M, so there are a couple of players that featured in both. But so first of all, it was Rory Owen. Secondly, Abbi Church. Now, what a season she's had. So she's won the double with the Eels awards. She won the Blue and Gold Army and the Players Player awards. And then at the Dally M, she's named fullback in the Team of the Year, and she's finished runner-up in the Dally M NRLW medal. Clint, apart from actually taking out the top gong, there's not too much more that she could have done individually or achieved individually this year, especially as well she has been selected in that PM's 13, as was previously mentioned.
Yeah, pretty great season from Abbi, right? I think anyone who watched the NRLW season with any sense of regularity across the Eels campaign this year would have been thoroughly impressed with Abbi. She's real energizer bunny out of the back there. Her pace off the mark as well. She has a brilliant turn of pace inside 10 meters. Exactly what you like to see in a fullback. And even more so in the NRLW. Like it seems like when she's hovering in around the middle third there, things just happen. brought the ball back with plenty of gusto. And I'm not surprised that she got as close as she did, and I'm a little bit disappointed she didn't get it. But you kind of get the feeling if we managed to get a result against either the Dragons or the Knights, or some better performance there, she might have just got there. But a great season nonetheless from Abbi, and a case of so close yet so far. But that doesn't take away from her achievements this year, and some very well deserved awards and appropriate acknowledgement by being selected for the Prime Minister's 13.
John, you and I have talked about how Abbi's been underrated by the pundits, not underrated by fans and the Parramatta Eels, but maybe that underrating has now finished with that placing at the Dally M's.
Yeah, one thing that was that sort of came through to me watching the pre-show, which I think Jake Duke was hosting alongside, forgive me, I can't remember who else was there, but it was, I think, Lauren Brown, the halfback for the Titans, ended up taking her place in the Team of the Year as a halfback, actually shouted out Abbi as her favourite to win the Dally M. And I think, she also came up as a serious contender among a few other conversations, but Lauren Brown, who was the sort of presumptive favourite while the voting was open still in the public, she went in leading, was looking at Abbi as a very serious candidate, if not the favourite. And I suppose that speaks to the stature that has grown for Abbi across her peers through the last couple of years. So she's certainly not, maybe she's still underrated in some quarters, but I'd like to think she's starting to be properly rated now and has been crowned on the back of that as the best fullback in the game this year. So very, very much well done to Abbi. She's been awesome for the Parramatta Eels. A real leader, both in the way she conducts herself as a player and then just hearing her bark orders at the team when they're on the goal line defending. She desperately wants to win. And it's we've made the comparisons before, but it's not too dissimilar to Gufferson on the male side of things. And Eels very privileged to have two fullbacks that are so full of energy and care so much about winning for both teams. In terms of the Team of the Year, boys, I got to say, it is a very good Team of the Year, but Elsie Arbor desperately unlucky to miss out. She was phenomenal this year. I know Millie Elliott and Shannon Martel were excellent and very much worthy. I'm not saying that they didn't deserve their selections, but must have been tough for Albert to miss out. That must have, surely that was a razor thin margin on splitting those three players.
Oh, look, it absolutely had to be. But speaking of Parramatta players that did take out awards, back to the Parramatta Eels awards, Rachel Pearson took out the Coaches Award. That's no real surprise. Pearson's been the on-field general this year. Her kicking game has gone to new heights. I think it's the best that I've seen from Rachel Pearson in her career. Legit 40-20 kicks, John.
Even 45s at some points. She was absolutely crushing that ball. And especially in the back half of the season, she really found a sweet spot on the release angle. I think she flattened out her kicking game a little bit, and that helped her get that penetration and that sort of roll on. And she used that to a great effect to get those sideline finders for the 40-30s or even better. So, yeah, definitely Pearson's best year in her career, 60s. I think she really flourished under the tutelage of Steve Georgalis. Didn't overcomplicate things. Just played good fundamental football as a controlling half. And I think that the balance of the team helped facilitate that. You had a strong running 5'8" there in Cassie Toihiku and obviously Abbi Church, who we just spoke about. The only real shame, and I think the thing that maybe not so much would have elevated Rachel's game, but would have brought that extra piece to the spine was the injury to Ruben in round one, which I think would have, the balance in our spine would have been phenomenal if that was there. And as it stands, Rachel was excellent. And it bodes well for next year, having that spine returning and the balance between those four players and the combinations they're going to be building with their respective edges. I'm really, really happy. But yeah, well done to Rachel. Very deserving of that Coach's Award. And
of course, that's not putting a mark against the girls that played in the dummy half role throughout the season either. In discussing about Ruben Cherrington's
and Todd Hunter
injury.
And Beckett, but Ruben was the number one dummy half. And she started the season very brightly, looked menacing through game one, and I think she got injured game two if my memory triggers right. But it was a big loss. So, but yes, Pearson, a very worthy recipient of that coach's award, and she did grow in stature this year, like Abbi Church, who I think Abbi still hasn't necessarily reached her ceiling, but for Rachel, that was the realization of her full skill set. She's shown that she can organise games and kick well, but I don't think she's done it as consistently as she has this year, and she was really good this year. So very pleased with what we have there, and like I said, very happy for our spine moving forwards.
And John's just spoken about Elsie Albert being unlucky not to take out an award at or be part of the NRLW Team of the Year. But when it comes to the Parramatta Eels, she has been recognised as the Player of the Year. And Clint, she's a worthy recipient, absolutely.
Yeah, big time. I don't think we can sing her praises much more than what we have throughout the season. But probably the most damaging forward runner in the game. And we've had Taufa with us before, who's no slouch herself. Geez, wouldn't it be good to have those two as a 1-2 punch just quietly? But Elsie was phenomenal. It's a good bounce back year for her. Given the injury struggles of last year, I think it was just the one game that she played, and it's the calf complaint that kept her out for season 2023. So, it's good to have her actually feel, if she kind of felt like a new signing this year, right? Given the lack of game time she had last year. So, long may it continue, and I believe she's off contract at the end of next season. So let's hope that we can see her extended.
Well, I'd like to think that players such as Elsie Albert, that Steve Georgalis has certainly built the team around, and I think she's found her home at Parramatta, surely. So, but that's not the end of what we're going to talk about from the awards night. So, Zali Faye, the Dally M NRLW Try of the Year. John, it was a spectacular effort, mate.
Yeah, it was specky was definitely the word I'd use for it. Leapt through the air. Should have been a penalty would have been a penalty if it wasn't a try itself, and was arguably a penalty try because that was very much being tackled in the air there. But she soared up, claimed that ball, and then held onto it through contact in the air to plant it on the goal line and score. Very much the try of the year there, and probably might have pipped out her compatriot there in Rory Owens, who her effort against the Titans must have been up there too. But Zoe and the high-flying antics there was very much a correct call, I think, because that's sort of try that makes you jump out of your chair and sort of yell and cheer and go all sorts of crazy. So very very good try. And look, if anything, it left me wanting a little bit more because we know that Zoe is capable of these things. We just haven't seen it consistently enough this year. And hopefully the way she finished this season means that she can build on it into next year because that was very much an excellent try.
Well, I think as we've talked about before, the NRLW team is a work in progress. There were giant strides that were made this season, but I think there's going to be some consolidation and development of them as a unit going into next year. So, we're perhaps going to see players start to realise their potential as they become part of more of a well-oiled unit. So others that I want to mention from the Dally M, Sean Lane and Mahalia Murphy, they didn't take out the awards, but they were nominated for their community work. And it's important that players are recognised for the community work that they do. Mahalia, especially with the work with the Indigenous community, Sean Lane in his work with the mental health space and also working with Ronald McDonald House. He's just, that's certainly an area that he excels in. Steve Georgalis, nominated for the Coach of the Year. Now, he missed out to Scott Prince. Now, I don't have a problem with the coach of the team that takes out the minor premiership winning the Coach of the Year award. I think it's, too often we look at coaches who you don't know whether what the basis of the improvement that they've got out of their team is or how long lasting it is. However, he does have a star-studded team up there in Brisbane, and they didn't qualify for the grand final. I guess the downfall for the Dally M's is that they are held before the grand final, and perhaps the Coach of the Year should go to whoever takes out the grand final. But I guess that'd be a bit boring, wouldn't it? There'd be no judgment involved. It'd just be standard that if you win the grand final, you become Coach of the Year. I guess using the same logic, that's why someone like Craig Bellamy took out the Coach of the Year in the NRL. He's guided the team to the minor premiership, the consistency in the performance of the Storm team over the years. I mean, we know that, they're not on our Christmas card list. They're not favourites of ours for various reasons, but you've got to acknowledge that consistency of performance. I wouldn't have been upset if Ivan Cleary had have received Coach of the Year. He's now guided the Panthers into their 5th consecutive grand final. So, it's an amazing performance. And I guess also with both of those teams, those particular coaches have been instrumental in developing players that are now stars within their club. So you have to give kudos where it's due there. But back to Steve Georgalis, the difference that he was able to make to the Eels team this year has been remarkable. Now, what I hope is that if he can sustain that development next year and get them into finals football, that it's not looked upon as a rise from, say, 5th to whatever position it might be next year. That's on how he's judged, because if he gets them into finals football next year, it will be growth from wooden spoon to finals football within 24 months. And I hope that should that happen, that he is recognised. Fellas, just quickly, there's been a bit of members news communicated via Eels CEO Jim Sarantinos. There's going to be 2 open training sessions before Christmas, one at Fairfield, one at Granville. There'll be a fan day that will be held in Parramatta, and there will be a members forum early in the new year as well. And that's again be confirmed that membership prices won't rise next year. I guess important that the Eels do the right thing by their members. It sounds like a solid start to, I guess, repairing the relationship with fans after such a disappointing 2024. What's your thoughts, Clint?
Well, the only thing better than freezing prices is making it cheaper, right? But like from the club has a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that that they're meeting certain revenue targets so that they continue to grow the club. So the fact that they find the ability to freeze membership prices, I think, is a good little thing that they can do for the fans. We're all experiencing cost of living pressures, and obviously something like season tickets for a lot of people is discretionary spend, a nice to have as opposed to a needs to have. So I think that's a good move on the club's behalf. But it's also good to see us having some member events back in classic Eels territory. Some events at Granville and Fairfield. Going around some of the great areas of the Parramatta catchment there.
Yeah, and so we're talking about I guess in terms of Fairfield, you'd be talking about the southern part of the catchment area. Granville, you're starting to look more towards the central part of the catchment area. And when there are events held up at Kellyville, you're talking about the northern area of the northern part of the catchment area. So anyone that's not familiar with the Eels catchment area, it is still absolutely vast because it extends from Cabramatta down in the south all the way to, basically, I think Wiseman's Ferry in the north. I mean, it is a massive travel going north to south. It's may not be quite as quite the same distance travelling east-west, although it's still a fairly large area. But that north-south travel, I mean, if you're looking at driving it, you're probably looking at
90 minutes at least.
An hour and a half, travelling from
at least 90 minutes.
north to south. So maybe a bit longer in traffic that's not so great. But, it's, as you said, it's great to see those events being spread around, and it's the people in some of those areas, especially those that are relying on public transport, it's a lot easier for them to get to, to be able to get to those particular training sessions, open training sessions. Fellas, believe it or not, I think we've actually wrapped up the Eels news. There was plenty of it, but we've got through it. John, that means it's your time of the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's another Melbourne Storm Penrith Panthers grand final, so let's get a little bit weird with it. And stakeholders down in Victoria might disagree with me, but Craig Bellamy only won 3 premierships. And it's the same is true for Ivan Cleary, funnily enough. So, unfortunately, one of them has to get the 4 when it comes to full-time on Sunday. And the way I'm thinking is maybe we can get him the 4 and just keep him at 4. So in that sort of spirit, we're going for a very weird genre of parody metal, I think it is. Parody is a song, Bodies, or you might know it more commonly as like When the Bodies Hit the Floor. And this is a numbers-based parody of that. So let's go with this one.
1, I can count to 1, 2, I can count to 2, 3, I can count to 3, 4, I can't count no more. 1, what comes after 1, 2, what comes after 2, 3, what comes after 3, 4. I can only count to 4, I can only count to 4, I can only count to 4. I can only count to 4, I can only count to 4, I can only count to 4.
Yeah, 4 premierships and that's it, Bellamy and Cleary. So don't get too greedy.
John, I don't know how your musical taste features on your playlists, but if there's some of the tracks you've been playing for us are part of your playlist, it is an eclectic taste that you have.
I wouldn't say...
I just want to say for our listeners out there, John has this just on hand and off the top of his head. And you know, he finds everything himself. He's not relying on AI. He's not using any bot to search things up with keywords. This is John's brain that makes all of this happen every week.
I watch and digest a lot of stuff on the internet, so you come across some weird and wacky songs, and stuff like this isn't certainly on my regular playlist, but it certainly does color the YouTube algorithm every now and then. So it'll spit out some funny stuff saying, "Oh, you like this
your
song.
suggested videos would be crazy."
Yeah, you like this song, so surely you're gonna like this song." And it's like, okay, yeah.
Now, what do you call that vocal stylings? That guttural, heavy, death metal sort of singing style.
I call it a sore throat.
It's it's almost like the Tibetan throat singers, isn't it? Like or the Mongolian throat singers, whichever one it is. And I think the best example of it is it System of a Down, and maybe is it Chop Suey, and just like that raw guttural like screaming from the throat, and it can't be good for the vocal cords.
No. So, mate, again, you've taken us down a rabbit hole. Well, the start of a rabbit hole, I should say. And anyone that enjoys that, I'm sure they'll be diving into a bit more of that. I can only count to 4. So,
yes. And let's hope that's true for the 2 teams involved on Sunday. No more premierships after this Sunday, please.
So let's dive into the rest of the NRL news. Now, this first came out later in the week, last week after we recorded the podcast, but we had the sacking of Kevin Walters, and since then, the appointment of Madge Maguire. Now, I think we're all expected to believe that the dismissal of Walters and getting the signature of Madge Maguire all took place within a period of 2 to 3 days in terms of all negotiations and the talk about it. So,
Dan.
Clint, yeah. How would you have viewed the timeline?
Convenient. Look, if you honestly think that any business makes these decisions within the space of that time, think anyone listening who is skeptical about these comments. Think about how long a business takes to hire just you in your everyday job. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but I mean that you as a worker in your business or your office, wherever it is that you might work. You have to go through an HR process, right? And it's not just because there's a select number of identified individuals out there that can NRL coach and are qualified to NRL coach that, they're all immediately on hand and they just go, oh yeah, we'll pick you. They still go through an interview process. There's the CEO and the executive team who join together to help make this decision. They conduct their interviews. They do their due diligence. That doesn't take place across 72 hours when you lose one employee and then suddenly gain another. This was like all things. It was lined up, and what may have happened is that, in my personal opinion, they gave Kevin the opportunity to look like he was jumping before he was pushed. He was really pushed, and they gave him the public courtesy of being able to suggest as such. And that wouldn't have been a surprise. And they probably looked at the situation and we don't want this to drag on and there to be speculation across the off season. We've got to get stuff ready for a preseason in about 5 weeks' time. Let's do this as quickly as possible. Sure, but all of this would have transpired from the second that round 26 concluded, or round 27 concluded, I should say, in terms of the formalities. But the talks and everything behind the scenes was happening well before that as well. Don't kid yourself if you think otherwise.
John, what do you think of the appointment? Is it going to work for Brisbane?
Look, Maguire's, at worst, he's been a solid coach. I think they maybe are overestimating his ability to get the max out of the squad based on what happened to the Rabbitohs and the success he had in the short term there. We saw at the West Tigers, it was more of a struggle for him, and I know that the Broncos have much better resources, both as a immediate playing team, the talent there, as well as just the raw resources that are in the Brisbane Broncos themselves. But I think Madge probably trends closer to a decent coach than a great coach, and I don't know, I watching him in Tiger Town didn't really impress, and again, it's the West Tigers and there's a lot of stuff going on there. But on the flip side, he did very well at the State of Origin arena. But again, State of Origin isn't week-to-week coaching, so I don't know. I agree with what Clint said. You're an absolute fool if you think this wasn't weeks and weeks in the planning, if not months. And Walter's card was marked a long time ago when the Broncos were clearly not competing for a premiership. But yeah, I think it'll be good for him. I don't know if it'll be great for him. They've certainly got a very talented squad, and he has shown in the past that he can work with stuff like that. But they've also got probably more egos than he's been used to. And can he, juggle a very young and, I suppose, willful team? There's lots of very talented players there, but also players that have found themselves in either spots of bother off the field or inconsistency on the field. So it's going to be interesting to watch, and hopefully they don't go too well for Parramatta's sake. But I certainly don't begrudge him.
I think if you go on track record, Madge seems to be the sort of coach who can get really good results out of a quality roster with star players. He's maybe a coach that's better suited to a short-term gig. Jack Gibson used to only stay for 3 years at any one club, maximum of 3 years at any one club. Maybe this will be the path that Madge Maguire goes down. You did mention as well that the coaching at the state of origin level is far different to coaching at club level, and it is. You haven't got the week-to-week drag that's there for the NRL, and juggling all the personalities and dramas that can happen within a club over an extended period of time, dealing with, I guess, supporter reaction, the pressures that come with being a coach at a particular club, and the Broncos are certainly in the media spotlight up there in Brisbane. So it'll be interesting to see how he goes. Look, I'm not going to be surprised if he has short-term success, but as I said, I think he's probably fits into that that short-term coach area in terms of what his appointment might be.
This development, I feel, is another chapter in my book, working title, that coaches are sick and they want this. Like he walked away from what many people would consider the dream job, state of origin, getting paid handsomely to, coach 3 games a year and do plenty of work through the season too, because you're scouting and in development and contact and, all sorts of stuff there. But he wanted the week-to-week grind, the 7 days a week, tension of getting up early, staying up late, trying to scheme for every opponent and figure out stuff in the roster. Coaches, it's a sickness. They want it. They want the stress. They want the grind. So
I hadn't considered it from that perspective, but you're right that some people might view origin coaching as the ideal job if you're a coach.
Yeah.
So it's
the pinnacle of the game in many people's estimation, and it's 3 games a year. You do the scouting and full season development, so you're still doing stuff, but you haven't got the 24/7 stress, which I think these guys, they're built for it. They want it. It's in their blood. So, and I suppose when you think about the interpersonal bonds you build with the men and women of the coaching staff, and then obviously the boys themselves playing in the NRL, that the highs and lows you share, it's even at Origin you can't get it. Like you obviously you have the momentous highs of winning a series the way we did this year, but it's not the same as being in the trenches shoulder to shoulder, week to week. So yeah, it is a bit of a sickness, I suppose, but I don't think anything else can emulate it, which is why they always find their way back to clubland.
Yeah, and of course that means the Blues have to find a new coach, so that's old news story as it is, and it's probably
the names they're putting up there. Like, are they even trying in the media? Like Ricky Stewart, Laurie Daly, Phil Gould. Come on.
Yeah. It's I think we won't start to get any idea about what's happening with that for another couple of months. But anyway, we move on. John, can you take us through last week's results in the finals?
Yeah, so grand final qualifiers for both the NRL and NRLW. We'll start with the men, where we had the 2 games played on Friday and Saturday, starting down in Amy Park, Melbourne, where the Melbourne Storm played out to pretty much your expectation, their 60s. 48-18, the final score here. I think I was a little bit more conservative in my estimation of Melbourne's expected victory, but the Storm pulling away. Look, the Roosters tried to stick in it, and they scored early in the second half twice to give themselves an outside chance of a comeback, but then Jerome Hughes, Ryan Pappenhausen and Cameron Munster put the foot on the throat and then just stomped on that trachea, and it was brutal. I think they scored 5 tries between them in that passage of play there, 4 tries because Hughes scored in the first half. So Hughes getting a hattie there, and while it didn't contribute to his Dally M medal because voting closes in the regulation rounds, of course. it was certainly the cherry on the cake heading into the Dally M's last night there. So way too good for the Roosters there. And then the other game, look, this one, it was a lot closer than the scoreline sort of suggested, but also I think the Sharks were the beneficiaries of a lot of close calls to keep them in it. But 26-6, the Sydney Roosters, the Penrith Panthers, winning against the Cronulla Sharks here. Alamotti, To'o, and Martin, the scorers, with Alamotti bagging a double. Sione Katoa scoring for the Sharks in the 59th minute. And that was, at that point, actually a try that had them back pretty much at level peggings, I think. Because the Sharks scored 59th, but the Panthers scored 22nd and 62nd. So, yeah, the game was balanced at that point, and then the Panthers finally ran away with it. I think as a microcosm of a lot of the Cronulla issues we've seen, I do commend Craig Fitzgibbon for having the balls to completely retool his team and make Braden Trindle, even though he had the number 6 on his back, the last quarter of the season, he has been the number 7. And that was true in this game as well. He was calling all the shots, making all the plays. Nico Hines was relegated to a secondary role, and the Sharks played much better because of it, and they have played much better because of it. But it's not easy as a coach, and even the player himself and Nico Hines, to swallow your egos and make that stuff happen, and that's what helped them be competitive. But again, Penrith too good, and I suppose the only interesting thing to come out of this one was the worries or concerns about Nathan Cleary's shoulder, which he is stressing that it is fine. And likewise in the other game, we saw Sofa Solomona suspended for 5 games. And fellas, I got to say, I am not a Sofa Solomona sympathiser. I think he's gotten away with so much stuff, even just against the Eels, let alone in the wider NRL. In the context of a Sofa Solomona sins, that surely was like a couple of Hail Marys and you can play next week. I don't know. Like I know they're taking into consideration that the prop Lindsay Collins was knocked out, which again I'm not sure if injury should be part of the process of adjudicating on the severity of it's not, the outcome shouldn't necessarily influence the process itself because that's how you put in guidelines. But I was surprised at the severity of the suspension because he's gotten away with so much for so long. And then here it is for a grand final, and they dropped the hammer on him to the point where he couldn't even argue for a grade, like a 1 grade downgrade to get to a lower tier. He needed a 2 grade downgrade to get to fight, and he obviously didn't succeed in it. So that's how the 2 games played out, and I suppose they're the 2 big talking points.
Yeah, Clint, a couple of things that I want to take up on from John's discussion just then. First of all, the gulf that exists just this season between from the Storm and the Panthers to everyone else. For mine, the final series was highly predictable.
Why bother? Everyone else could have got a 3-week early holiday, and we'll let Penrith and Melbourne have a best of 3 series.
And yet we were talking about the 60s after the first week of finals, and we had the initial results of who booked their ticket to the grand final qualifier. I think it was Sportsbet because I think it popped up on Fox. Both the Storm and the Panthers were paying just over $2 to make the grand final. So you had a pretty solid even way bet there to turn a profit at least one way, if not both ways, on both teams making the grand final. So really weird market there because they were clearly the best 2 teams this year.
And for anyone that took up that bet, you can thank me because I didn't have any money on it. That was the only way. That was the only way it wasn't going to play out for the Storm and the Panthers to get through to the grand final. So first of all, I have that point. Secondly, with Sofa Solomona, I sort of agree with John there in terms of on his history of sins, but and that being low down on that in comparison. But you live by the sword, you die by the sword. And I'm sorry, but with Nelson, I'm never going to forget that hit he put on Makahesi Makatoa, into the back of the head, where he didn't face any consequence in the game from memory. And I think, did he end up with a 1-game suspension? as a result of that? Did he get any suspension? I have it in my head. Maybe it
I
was.
don't think he got suspended, did he?
Yeah, I don't think he got suspended.
Yeah, I mean
if it was a 1 game
abominable-
suspension. Yeah.
Yeah, that was an abominable hit. Like I saw vision of it again during the week after.
Yeah, he got fined. He was fined.
He was fined.
He was fined.
There
Yeah.
you go. I mean that was an absurdity. So you know what? He's escaped penalty time and time again. So I've actually got no sympathy for him in that regard. And it might sound a bit harsh, and Storm supporters might be.
I understand where you're coming from. I just find like it's darkly humorous that of all the bullshit he's done on the field, this is where the MRC decides to drop the hammer. And I think that the fact that Collins was knocked out has been the driving force in the severity of the charge, which I think is always a slippery slope, because you're talking about you're trying to adjudicate on processes, not outcomes, in order to be fair to every, or the consistency of the process that happened in the field. If you start processing based on outcomes, it lends itself to teams starting to fake injuries, which I'm not saying Lindsay Collins did. He was clearly knocked out. Like that is sort of irrespective of what we're seeing here. Just I feel like for methodology, it's better to be adjudicating on process, not outcome. So, yeah, it is darkly humorous that he gets rubbed out for a grand final. And, the last time the Storm had a big player rubbed out for a grand final was probably Cam Smith back against Manly was 08. And look, Sofa Solomon is not Cam Smith. So it's not going to be that kind of loss to the team. But it is a loss to their forward back. And I think it does tip the scales a bit towards Penrith, even if all the talk seems to be that Melbourne are the favourites.
Well, the other point that you make, John, that I'd interested in Clint's comment on is the injury to Nathan Cleary. So I'll put this to you, Clint. If this injury occurred in the middle of the season, how many weeks would Nathan Cleary be out for?
Oh, a few, you'd think. The way that he was clutching at it, and the thing with shoulders, and John will probably attest to this as well. The risk of nerve damage, and I'm uncertain whether it's an AC joint or whether it's something else. But
well, he's having post-season surgery, isn't he?
But is that on the other shoulder? That was booked for, or is it the same shoulder that the recurrence has happened here? Because either way, he's clearly not 100%. And I tell you what, you'd be running Katoa at him as early as possible in the game. You give him a couple of early hit-ups just to see how he's holding up. If you're Melbourne, and I'm sure they will, they certainly don't miss a trick when it comes to these things. But yeah, for the middle of the season, you find it hard to believe that Nathan's taken the field this week. But it's all for the big prize, isn't it? So you push through it, and he's going to be having surgery a week or two later anyway. So if he goes down in the first minute, or if he goes down in the 79th minute, probably means little to him personally in the scheme of what he's playing for.
It's
well, we're about to. Sorry, John.
I was going to say it's funny. I wouldn't call it a parallel because it's kind of like an inverse of a parallel. But wasn't Jerome Luai going into the grand final last year carrying a injury that was very contentious about whether he should play or not? He ends up playing, cannot complete the game. In fact, he gets rubbed out pretty early on, which caused Nathan Cleary to have to put the team on his shoulders and conjure that all-time 20 minutes of play that we saw to spearhead.
Let's not undersell the role of Jack Cogger there either.
Yeah,
he
exactly.
He absolutely helped Penrith, he opened it up.
That's right. But if the reverse is true this time, and I know that Jerome Luai is taking big strides this year, if it is Cleary that goes down, sometime in the first half, I assume it's going to be what are the team lists?
Schneider's on the bench.
Yeah, so Brad Schneider. Can Schneider and Luai do the same? I don't know. It's going to. I'm drawing a long line here.
You've read the tea leaves, John. You're seeing it unfold already.
But yeah, it's just funny how we got a similar but different storyline coming into the grand final 2 years running, and Cleary is the engine in that team. He makes so much what they do go from being great to genuinely all time, and I know he's trying to downplay the severity of the injury, and he will, even if he was seriously injured, he'd be like Cooper Cronk. He would needle up and play through it to give his team the best shot at winning because he knows how important he is to the team. And that's not arrogance from his perspective. That is just the truth. But it's definitely going to be an important thing to focus on through the game because I saw the comparisons of the two reactions to the two tackles from when he initially did the shoulder earlier in the season to when he did it most recently against the Sharks. And the first time around, it was a far more severe reaction. Like he stayed on the ground, was clutching at the shoulder, could clearly see he was in distress immediately. The second time around against Cronulla, it was, he grabbed that and looked pain, but then sort of, soldiered on and got back into the defensive line and got through his work for a couple of sets before I pulled him. So I'm probably leaning towards the fact he'll be able to get through the game unless there is an acute incident that hits that shoulder in such a way that would have been pretty much injured regardless of a pre-existing injury.
Well, we're going to, for our listeners, we're going to dive into a grand final preview momentarily. But before we do, John, can you run through the NRLW finals results from last week?
Yeah, 4 games between the NRL and NRLW and those grand final qualifiers. I think it's fair to say we got one upset, and it was the Cronulla Sharks, who were high-flying for most of the season and then came crashing down to the point where it looked like they were going to be one and done in the finals. And instead, they managed to produce an almighty upset, going up to Brisbane and shutting out the Broncos 14-0. Tiana Penatani, Nessa Biddle, and Casey Staples are try scorers. Taylor Preston 1 from 3 on those goal kicks. But yeah, what a huge effort from the Sharks. They, I don't think anyone gave them a chance. I know I didn't. In my tip, I was strongly advocating for the Broncos as the common sense pick. And to their credit, they found a gear that they hadn't been able to find for a number of weeks and put the Broncos into the off-season a week earlier than the Broncos were anticipating.
Yeah, and we got the result that we expected in the other match, although I think that one was a little bit harder to tip.
Yeah, we called this one a coin flip game, and I think the scoreline sort of indicates that while the Sydney Roosters did prevail 25-16 to book a ticket into the grand final, they had a nervous moments, in the back end of this game with tries to Eva McEwen and Olivia Higgins for the Knights in the final 10 minutes, sort of putting the the game into a very much a contestable state. And it was a Taryn Aiken 1-point field goal in the 66th minute that helped give them a bit of a safety buffer there and put that lead out to a more comfortable sort of margin. But definitely a closer game here. But the Roosters, they've come good at the right time of the year. And while the Newcastle Knights did something similar in that back half of the season, the Roosters were always a step ahead, and I think that was true in this result here. And we talked about the importance of getting Taryn Aiken back into that team, Sixties, and she was part of the difference there.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, we'll be previewing that NRLW grand final in just a moment. Before we dive into that, the major gongs at the Dally M's were taken out by players who are participating in these grand finals this weekend. Was there any surprises as far as you were concerned, John, about the recipients of the major awards?
No, I had Jerome Hughes as a legitimate contender for a good stretch of the season. So I wasn't too surprised by him taking it out. We always talk about one of your best abilities being availability, and Hughes played all the season, except for that ridiculous suspension he copped for touching a referee that was in his way in the defensive line. And thank goodness that didn't rub him out of Dally M contention. So, yeah, that one pretty much as I expected. So fair pick. And Kernick's been awesome. So it's not often that you see forwards claim the best player in the competition, and it's always good to see one do it. And I know the NRLW is still very much growing and hasn't got as many established stars in the playmaking ranks as the NRL, but it's no small feat for a forward to take off the top gong there. So well done to her. And they're obviously going to be very important players for their respective teams on Sunday. And Jerome Hughes' story is great, from a guy that was sort of floating around Reggie's up in Queensland, getting his chance at the Storm and sort of playing from fullback into the halves, and the process, the amount of hard work that goes into making that conversion is not insignificant. And he's done very, very well there. His team obviously had a lot of fun taking the mickey out of him last night and teasing him about all the aspects that went into him getting that medal and how he doesn't have a lot of confidence in him winning it, but they all doing him and all the other little sort of in-jokes there. And, yeah, he seems like a good bloke. And likewise for Kernick, just an awesome player who did very well this year.
Yeah, Clint, pretty hard to argue with the selections.
Yeah, I was surprised that it was this James Tedesco was as close as he was in the end. Not that James Tedesco had a bad season by any stretch of the margin, but I just thought Jerome was head and above everyone else, head and shoulders above everyone else this season. So,
look,
very, very deserved winner.
Not to be a cynic, but it does make you wonder if once it goes behind closed ballots, if they do know the total still and want to keep it interesting. Because you thought,
you don't want to not that you want to point fingers, but there's always a sense of that, isn't there? Because we don't know what happens, and you don't want to necessarily suggest outright that there's a controlled outcome there, but you want to put a sense of heightened entertainment around it, don't you?
And also the fact that I will die on the hill that even with the 6-point system, which in a way I'd argue makes things even worse because it leads to higher swings, the Dalian system is just not a good system for voting. And I know that it doesn't exist anymore. I was always a huge fan of the Rugby League Weekly or Rugby League Week 10-point system for every player. I thought that was a much better metric of consistency and excellence. And look, it's a lot more effort, a lot more resources to put in there to adjudicate games and get. You're never going to get objective, but as reduce the subjectivity of a score as much as possible. But I always felt that tend to spit out worthy player of the years more often than not. And I know Paul Gallen got a few because of his insane work rate, but I think that was reflective of the peak Paul Gallen too. I know we meme on him for some stuff in the tail end of his career in Origin, but prime Paul Gallen was very good. So
yeah,
I do prefer the Rugby League Week model. I don't know if it's the best model, but I think it's better than the Dalian model.
I think the other thing to bear in mind as well is that Jerome Hughes had that 6 points taken away, and were it not for that suspension, he would have been 7 points clear at the end, and they wouldn't have needed to worry about the last round in terms of the points that were won. So anyway, we now, fellas, need to move to the grand final preview. So, John, can you take us through the NRLW match just to start off with?
Yeah, so this one is being played as the curtain raiser or the second game in the slot. I believe it's the National Championship in Reggie's. Then it's this game, which kicks off at 3:55 p.m, and then obviously the NRL Grand Final. It is 2v4, Roosters v Sharks. So we go player v player, position v position. It is Sam Bremner up against Emma Tonegado at fullback. On the wings, Jamie Fressard and Bridie Parker for the Roosters match up against Cassie Staples and Georgia Ravics for the Sharks. Tiana Penatani and Isabel Kelly, two captains in the centres. Don't see that too often. They're wearing the 3 and 4 respectively. Surgis and Biddle for the Sharks and Roosters there in the other jerseys. In the halves, Jocelyn Kelleher and Taryn Aiken line up against Georgia Hanaway and Taylor Preston. Front row sees Millie Elliott, Killy Davis and Atessa Pule for the Roosters up against Ellie Johnston, Quincy Dodd and Holly Wheeler for the Sharks. Back rows, the big, powerful wrecking ball, Amber Hall, the Dally Empire of Year, Olivia Kernick and Tiana Davison. Excellent back row there for the Roosters. For the Sharks, it's Talia Holmes, Rhiannon Byers and Brooke Anderson. On the benches, Tavana Papali'i, Jasmine Strange, Samantha Economus and Pani Hopewade. And then for the Sharks, Philomena Hanesi, Manalita Takapalatoa, Vanessa Foliaki and Tegan Dimmick. And they extend the rosters, Wood, Hilmawana, Navidi, Lopamoa and Rose for the Roosters. And then for the Sharks, Davis Walsh, Saunders, Detroit, Smale and Leilua for the girls from the Shire. Who's got the whistle here? Do we have a list? So Ziggy Adamski's got the main whistle there. Casey Badger's in the box. No silent officials named. But this one you can catch on pretty much every main channel there that is associated with 9 or Foxtel, which while I believe the main game will be exclusive to 9, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is exclusive to 9. So if you do have Foxtel KO, you can catch the NRLW Grand Final, which is nice.
Okay, Clint, I'm going to throw to you first. Who wins this one and why?
Well, I'm going to answer that question with there's the team I want to win and there's a team that I think will win. You always like to see David take down Goliath, and that would be Cronulla, assuming the role of David in this analogy. But you'd have to assume the Roosters would be far too strong. we've joked about the quality of their side for much of the NRLW season. It's hard to see them doing it by any less than 13 plus.
Yep. John?
Yeah, common sense says Roosters win and win well. And I think the betting line reflects that. Roosters 133 favourites for the sports bet line there. I'm going to tip the Sharks just because it's a cool story. But I'm doing that knowing that they are massive underdogs. In saying that, they do have some great players. Tonagato, Penatani, Biddle, very good in the back line there. A lot of former Eels there too. We talk about Penatani there, but you look through there, you got Preston, Johnston, who else is there? Anderson, Hanesi, Foliaki. So a lot of former Eels in the 17. Davis Walsh too, obviously spent a season with us in the extended roster. But yeah, I think the Roosters win and win well, but I will barrack for the Sharks here.
Look, I think the Roosters win. The Roosters win well. You know my thoughts on Taryn Aiken. She will be the player of the match. But you look at the rest of the Roosters squad, it's full of stars. They've got the centre pairing that all clubs would be envious of. They've got the edge back rowers that are going to back up alongside those centres. What can you say about Bremner at fullback? It's look, I think they're just going to win on the strength of they are a strong team. They've had a consistent season. They'll take it one step forward by being far too good in this game. I think the Sharks have done well to get to the grand final, and this will be just a step too far for them. I think the Roosters win by probably 13 plus. So, sorry to say that about a grand final, but I think that will be the case. And I'm not saying that to be disrespectful to the Sharks. It's just it's how strong that Roosters team is. They were my tip at the start of the season. They're my tip at the end of the season. So, John, that now takes us to the NRL Grand Final.
7:30 p.m. kickoff out at Accor Stadium. You can catch us one on 9, and apparently 9 now. I didn't know they live streamed the Grand Final, but there you go. So again, we'll go through position by position, and the betting line for this one is just wild. 190 for the Storm, microscopic favourites over the 194 Panthers. So the betting agency doesn't really know who to favour here. At fullback, we have Ryan Pappenhausen up against Dylan Edwards, Will Warbrick and Xavier Coates up against Sania Turuva and Brian To'o, so two sets of outstanding wingers there. In the centres, Jack Howarth and Nick Meaney line up against Isaac Tungo and Paul Alamotti. Halves see Cam Munster and Jerome Hughes against Luai and Cleary, and probably two of the best halves pairings you're going to get in the competition. In the front row, Tui Kamikamifa has been called up to replace the suspended Nelson Asofa Solomona. He's going to work in the front row of Josh King and Captain Harry Grant at dummy half. That formidable Penrith front row of Moses Leota and James Fisher-Harris, who have stepped up pretty much every grand final in the last 3 years, line up in the usual 8 and 10 there. Mitch Kenny, the dummy half. You got Sean Bloor, Elisai Kosoa, and Trent Laero as the back rowers for Melbourne. Luke Garner, Liam Martin, and Zaya Yo on the Penrith Panthers side. On the bench, the breakout star of the year, Tyron Wishart, headlines that bench there with Christian Welch, Lazarus Valepu, a Penrith junior, and a development player for Storm, getting a chance to break the heart of his former club, with Alec McDonald rounding out their interchange. On the other half, you got the player that Clint tipped earlier about Brad Schneider. He's there to cover the halves, with Lindsay Smith, Liam Henry, Matt Eisenhuth rounding out their rotation. Extended roster, you got Anderson, Chan, Bradley, Tepai Moroa, and the dynamic Fire Longoff for the Storm. Then Casey McQueen, Sorensen, Tolau, Laurie, and Summerton for the Panthers. Ashley Klein has been handed the whistle, while Grant Atkins gets the hot seat in the box. So, yeah, that's a peak NRL right there. If you had to say so myself, of Klein and Atkins getting the call for the big game.
John, that's the Parramatta Eels dream team of officials, and I say that with all sense of sarcasm intended.
Dripping.
So, I'm dumbfounded about, and and I know I look, if I say I'm not intending any sort of disrespect to Ashley Klein, that just sounds pathetic for me to say that when I am a critic of Ashley Klein as a match official. It's not to say that he's incapable of refereeing good matches, because he has done that. But I don't think he's the best referee in the NRL, and I'm a little bit dumbfounded by his selection to be the main official in this one. But there you go. Clint, same. I'll start with you again. Who wins this match and why?
I'm going to say who cares, because this is just the manifestation of everything that's frustrating about rugby league. And, we scratched the surface a little bit before in terms of, I guess we're alluding to, as opposed to directly referencing, the fact that the last 10 minor premiers have been one of 3 teams. And within that 3 are these 2 teams. The last 10 premiers have been one of, I think it's 5 teams, 2 of them being outliers in the Sharks and Cowboys, and then these 2 teams, as well as the Roosters. It just kind of feels like typical run of the mill. If you're a neutral and a supporter of any one of the other, I'm going to say 14 teams and exclude the Roosters in this, you're kind of just like, I don't really care who wins, as long as they beat the crap out of each other. For some of the rugby league purists, this is aiming up to be a potentially really competitive grand final, and it's hard to pick and separate the 2 teams because of that. But as an Eels fan, and I'm sure fans of any other sides out there that might be listening to this, you're kind of like, I don't really care if Melbourne wins by 4 or if Penrith win by 4, if Melbourne wins by 30 or if Penrith wins by 30. What's it really matter in the end? It's just going to kind of be like, even if it is a really good game, one of those games where you're like, oh yeah, it's just another year where Penrith or Melbourne won it. We don't really remember that year, And I'm sure it'll be a high quality game. I'm gonna briefly give it to Penrith, just because of how many times they've been there and done that the last few years, and on paper, their side looks slightly stronger to me, but, I'm not going to be surprised who wins either way. I'm just going to be like, thank God the season's over. Let's get our hopes up again to be disappointed next year.
Okay. On the back of Clint's dim view of both teams, John, who wins this view and why?
It is a very tight game, and I think, again, the betting line reflects that. It's kind of pick your poison. My poison here will be the Melbourne Storm. I think a three-peat is plenty enough for a dynasty for Panthers. It's time that we've had enough of that. And yes, it means that the Melbourne Storm will get I can only count the 4 premiership for Craig Bellamy. But, geez, it's yes. I don't know. I will go for Melbourne. I don't know if you can call it supporting them, but it's what I'm going to go for. It's going to be, I assume, a banger of a game. Probably maybe even just a field goal in it, or maybe single score in it. So I'll go maybe 22-23 to the Melbourne Storm.
Yeah, fellas, I'm not going to differ too much to you, because this grand final pits 2 teams that I despise. Now, I might, on one hand, admire them, but I most definitely despise them. Both teams have beaten the Eels in grand finals. The history of the Melbourne Storm is well documented for reasons why they aren't one of my favourite teams.
Not on your Christmas card list.
No, as I've said that, and I think I wrote it in the bumpers up column. They're not on my Christmas card list. But equally, the Penrith Panthers, and it's as much for some of the garbage we've had to put up with as supporters up at Penrith Park in the past as anything else. I can talk about how great they are in terms of their achievements and admire and respect what they've been able to succeed with in the last 5 years, but I don't like them.
If they could
I-
both lose, that would be a great outcome. The rest of for the rest of the NRL supporter base, that would be wonderful. Except the Roosters.
Yeah. So that said, I won't be cheering for them, but I will be tipping the Melbourne Storm to win this. And forced to say, who would you prefer to win? I'm probably going to go with the Melbourne Storm, and much for the same reason as 40 played his musical interlude. It's, I don't want even Penrith to get to the 4 titles in a row. So now, when I look at the teams, I think the story is basically told about the strength of each team through the spine, because both teams have got great fullbacks, outstanding halves. The Storm might have the edge at dummy half there with Harry Grant, but that doesn't mean that the Panthers aren't well served there. The Storm just do remarkably well, because if you look at their forwards, there aren't really superstars.
They're not household names, yeah.
No, not at all. And it's a credit to Craig Bellamy about what he's able to extract from them, and about the formula that works for them in terms of team composition. The Panthers, I think, have the edge when it comes to the forwards in terms of their names on paper, maybe their strike power, but in terms of what they're actually capable of doing and what they do for their respective teams, well, you can't fault what the Storm forwards do. Then you look at the centres and you go, well, both teams there actually have centres who aren't necessarily superstars, but they are players who have struck form in the back half of the season. I mean, really, really strong form. And John, we've been talking about Jack Howarth for years. I mean, he's been on the radar for such a long time as a, inverted commas, player of the future. And it looks like his potential is starting to be realised, although I think most were expecting him to come through as an edge forward, weren't they?
Yes.
Rather than as a centre.
He projected to be an edge back row, correct?
Yeah. So, look, maybe on paper, the Panthers might just have the edge, but you can't fault the 2024 season from the Storm. So I'm going to go with them to continue their strong form. The Panthers, I'll tell you what, if Cleary was out, then I think they were no chance of actually competing with the Storm in this. It's a measure of how invaluable Cleary is to the team. I think what we've seen this year from the Panthers is that they are capable of winning games without Cleary, but they're not capable of winning the competition without their halfback. And he's there under a cloud. I think, as you said before, John, that he'll be tested out. I expect, and really, there's probably no team that would do that better than the Storm. So we know that they've had quite a few tricks up their sleeve as far as tackles are concerned in the past, and I think we might see whether they've got anything new to their arsenal this week. I expect the Storm to win. I expect them to win by 10 points or more. I'll go really out on a limb with that and go for the double-digit spread of points. Okay, fellas, that just about takes us to the end of the podcast. And it wraps up the 2024 season. In doing so, it's not the end of our podcasts for the year. We will continue with a weekly podcast, catching up with whatever news is floating around. Who knows? We might be able to knock off a podcast in less than 40 minutes when we're getting into the next few weeks. But as far as this one's concerned,
Lies
as far
make
as this
baby
is
Jesus cry.
concerned. We do have the Pacific Championships coming up. We've got the PM's 13 that's being played as well. So there's plenty of stuff that we're going to be able to talk about. And then before you know it, we're going to have the Eels pre-season starting, and that starts in early November. So we're really talking about 4 weeks away. So John, Clint, another fine podcast from you two. Thank you again to Star Partners Real Estate, Auburn, Narellan and Parramatta. Thank you to our listeners for again tuning in to the Cumberland Throw Tip Sheet podcast. And as I always say, fellas, go you mighty Eels.